Hello, everyone. Apologies for the late start, but we're really happy to have you here and also have Denise Yu joining us for this session. So she'll be teaching us about tech doodling. All you need is a pen and paper, and I'll let her introduce the workshop. But a quick bio about Denise is that she works as a senior software engineer at GitHub, and she builds tools to facilitate productive and healthy collaboration within open source communities. And in her own words, her superpower is visualizing every technical concept in terms of cat cartoons. And I can vouch for that. She's great at cat cartoons. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. I'll put the captions on and you can translate the captions in a bunch of different languages if you prefer. And a recording will be available after this call. But if you have any questions, I think there's a Q&A time that Denise has put in a bunch of places in the workshop or after. So there's a Q&A window on the right that you can submit your questions in, and she'll be taking them up. And it'd be great if you could follow along with the workshop. So if you are doodling at home as well, please tweet us. We want to see what you're making. Use the hashtag Let's Sketch Tech or VisualizeIT, and I'll put them in the Q&A as well, but we'd love to see it. So from now, I'll leave it over to Denise.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Eamon. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. If you can't, please let Eamon know or myself as soon as possible, because this workshop won't really work unless you can see my slides. So thank you all so much for being here. I know it is Saturday. I know it's been a long year already, but this workshop will be 2 hours of hopefully relaxing, just really chill, creative activity. This workshop is family friendly. If you do have children at home, welcome. I'm so glad that you're with us today. There are some sections of this that are kind of geared towards technical professionals, but you can fill in the gaps. I'll sort of like talk through those a little bit. If you don't work in technology currently, I'll provide alternatives at those points. But the name of this workshop is Telling Stories with Doodles. It's designed around 4 kind of modules. I do run a longer version of this workshop sometimes, which I'll provide links to throughout the slides. This is hands-on, so if you want to follow, I will be pausing for you to practice on your own. So all you need is pen and pencil, really. Nothing fancy. If you have markers or crayons or colored pencils, that's great. Have those with you, not necessary. If you have an iPad or any kind of digital drawing device that you want to use, feel free to use that as well. But, Eamon, there's someone in chat saying, I don't see or hear anything. Has the event started? Do you mind looking into that? Okay, I'm just going to keep going because I think at least this is being recorded, worst case scenario. Okay, so yeah, so please do grab some pen and paper if you're using a digital drawing device like an iPad. Unfortunately, I can't really stop too long to give you specific debugging around that. There is another workshop that Caitlin Gu did a few weeks ago called Drawing with Procreate, or getting introduction to Procreate. So if you're interested in more specifics around digital drawing, I do encourage you to check that one out. But today we're just going to be low fidelity, just pen and paper. So without further ado, hopefully, Eamon, there's another person in chat saying that, okay, cool. Thanks, Taylor, for saying you can hear and see just fine. Okay, so it seems like it's not a global problem. It might be local to some people's setups. I think if you can't see, try restarting Teams. Teams prompted me to install an update when I opened it this morning, so that might be the issue, but this is all being recorded, so you're not going to miss any content. And we also have recorded multiple versions of this workshop in the past. So we'll make sure to get those links to you in case you drop off or have to restart today. But it's okay. We have a lot of wiggle room built into today. So it'd be great if I could. All right. So I sort of just wanted to start off this workshop by just acknowledging that it's been kind of a hard week for a lot of people, myself included, especially those of us who are based in the US. And I just want to, kind of, drawing to me has always been a form of self-care, especially in the last year. So I hope that by the end of today, you walk away with some more tools for being able to express yourself, being able to use doodling and storytelling as another outlet for self-care, that's kind of my ambition for running this workshop. There will be time for questions at the end of it, but I hope that you do get, like a personal practice, and you do personally get something out of this. I just want to acknowledge that it's been a really hard year and a hard week for a lot of people. So for those of you, kind of feeling isolated or scared, like I was really scared this past week. I think you're definitely not alone, and I hope that we can build a community around storytelling and using art to tell our stories to kind of connect us all. So by way of introduction, if you haven't met me before, my name's Denise. I wear a lot of hats. In the before times, I used to speak at a lot of conferences, go to a lot of conferences, and I've met quite a lot of sketchnoters and people who are combining art and tech through that space. But by day, I'm a senior software engineer at GitHub. I build things for open source maintainers, which is a lot of fun. I also draw. My art is at deniseu.io/art, which I think I'll link to a couple times. But my passion is sort of helping people to tell their stories, whether that's by technical speaking, by drawing, by blogging, content creation, anything like that. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that at the end of this. And I also ran a conference in May. This little drawing here is part of the promo that we did for that conference. If you are interested in digging deeper into this space, Let's Sketch Tech Online was the name of the conference. We have a YouTube channel. We have lots and lots of videos on our YouTube channel from that conference. So I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in mashing art and tech together. So the other thing I want to call out is I found a bunch of random stickers that I made like years ago for one of those like artist alley things. I have extras in my closet right now. So if you want to share your art that you generate during this workshop using the hashtag VisualizeIT, I'll be looking at that hashtag, and Nitya and I will go through and choose a couple of people who, like share things we thought were really fun or cute or whimsical. And we might DM you and say, hey, like, do you want some stickers? This is just kind of an incentive for people to share. I think it's really fun for people to like start sharing and check out what other people have produced while going through the same materials. Cool. So yeah, I can physically mail you stickers at the end of this if you want. So today's objectives are, these are at least my objectives. Yours might be different, and that's totally okay. This unfortunately is a one-way stream, so I can't call on people to tell what their objectives are. But I hope by the end of this, you pick up some skills to start telling your own stories, whether those are technical, whether those are non-technical, whether it's about your life, your career, your journey, anything like that, using low fidelity and quick doodles. And I'm going to say the word like low fidelity, quick and dirty, quick and easy. I'm going to say those terms a lot because I want to emphasize that this is not going to turn you into like an artist by the end of it, like a professional artist or anything. I don't consider myself to be a professional artist. To me, this is a means to an end of self-expression. So I hope to equip you with some of those tools as well. I'm going to concretely show you how to represent very common concepts in stories and in the technical domain, and hopefully help you build some confidence to start doing this in real time if you want to be one of those people who goes to tech conferences and is kind of like furiously scribbling in the corner, and you can go up to the speaker at the end and be like, look at this, like I drew your talk. And I've done this a bunch of times. 99 times out of 100, actually for me it's like 100 times out of 100, the speaker has been like overwhelmingly happy that someone took the care to like record their talk in such a thoughtful way. So this is also, like the output of doing this and generating artifacts of other people's talks or maybe your own talks is just a fantastic way to network and make new friends and meet more people doing cool things in whatever industry you're in. So I talked a little bit about this earlier. If you do want to follow along, I've designed this workshop to facilitate following along. If you don't want to follow along, that's also okay. There are just going to be some awkward pauses for you, and you can listen to music or do whatever during those times. But do go ahead and grab some paper and pen. I recommend using a non-erasable implement. So if you have pencil, put that eraser away. But I recommend using like a gel pen or even just like any kind of ballpoint pen, something like that. The reason for that is because for a lot of people, perfectionism creeps in super easily when you're doing this. And that's the thing that makes drawing not fun. I think that's the thing that kills motivation early on more than anything else. If you commit to using an implement that you can't erase, it means that you always have to move forward. So if you mess up, what does that mean? You just do it again. Don't spend your time erasing during this workshop. Don't worry about getting every line perfect, because that is aggressively not the point of this exercise. The point of this exercise is just to get ideas onto paper as imperfect as they are. imperfect is beautiful, I think, in this case. I actually really like, I go to the grocery store and purposely buy the vegetables that are really ugly and deformed because I love them. They feel like the neglected ones to me. So I have a soft spot for things that are imperfect. And I hope you develop a little bit of forgiveness and grace towards the imperfect as well by the end of this. So the first module, we're 15 minutes in now, so I'm going to shift my timelines a little bit. We're going to spend about 25 minutes on this, and then probably 20 minutes on this on the next part. I do want to commit to taking breaks often. I think it's incredibly important for doing anything. It's incredibly important for just the amount of hours that we're on Zoom and on Microsoft Teams these days. So we are going to take a break at the 1 hour mark. So let's dive right in. So get your pen and paper ready. I want to first talk about why we should learn a little bit about representing people and emotions when it comes to talking about technical concepts, because those two ideas might feel very far apart initially. But my argument is, I think that regardless of what we're talking about, we should try to tell stories. And every story needs to feature at least one character. That character might not be a human. That character might be a server, right? Or it might be a request going through a system. It doesn't really matter how human, how animalistic, what that character is. All characters need to be able to draw in the viewer and tell about their state of mind, tell about how they're feeling, how they're interacting with their world. That's the part that pulls the viewer into empathizing with the story that you're trying to tell. I think that's the really important hook that brings, kind of breathes life into stories in a way that I love technical documentation, and I respect docs writers to no end, but that's the difference between a technical story versus technical documentation. And we're not going for documentation today. We're going for stories. We want to talk about your experience doing this thing rather than how to do this thing. So we're going to build up what I call a visual library, which is just a very fancy word of just a very fancy way of saying I practiced drawing this thing once and I can draw it again quickly. So by building up a visual library means that in the moment, we can draw things much faster without having to imagine, because we just recall. It's recall versus creating or imagining. So the most basic way to draw a character that I think everyone has probably done at some point in their lives is a stick person. And if this is where you're at today, a lot of people go through this workshop and they're like, yep, stick people, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm going to be forever. That's fine. Yeah, the slides are supposed to change. Are you not seeing them change? Let me try it. Oh God, okay. Let me stop share and share again. Is that working now? Okay, I'm so sorry everyone for the rough technical start. Okay, do you see stick people now, Eamon? Okay, I'm really, really sorry. I didn't realize that. Okay, now we're on track. It's been a rough day already. Okay, I'm really sorry, everyone. We do have a recorded version of this workshop that is less rocky. We'll blast out the link to that afterwards. So stick people, okay, let's keep going. So if you're at stick people today, that's totally fine. You already have enough in your toolkit to tell a story. But I'm going to show you a couple other devices. One of them is called Star People. This was taught to me by Jennifer Tu, by way of a bunch of other people who are really, really talented sketchnoters and storytellers. Star People are very much like stick people. They just have a little more volume to their bodies. It's kind of a combination of drawing a stick figure with a 5-pointed star. I sometimes get asked about line order, so I'll quickly play this GIF that I recorded earlier. This is how I do Star People. I start with the head because ever since I was a kid, I'll play these things twice actually while I talk over them. I have a really hard time spatially positioning heads if I don't do them first. You might be the same way. Some people might be able to start with bodies and then go back to the heads, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. Another thing that I've been doing, I've been drawing comics during the pandemic, and I've been looking for simple and fast ways to represent people because I didn't want to do stick figures or star people, but I wanted to do something that was still kind of fun and fast. So I kind of loosely call this kind of person a card person or a box person, because it's a circle that slightly overlaps a rectangle, which is the body. If you've seen the comic strip, like Cyanide and Happiness, slightly not like kid friendly, but if you've seen that comic strip before, they use a variation of this, like rectangle body, circle head, and that's just kind of like their language for humans across the entire webcomic. So this is also something you could play with. Another device that's super, super useful when you're doing conference, when you're like recording conference talks, is tooth people. And the reason why tooth people are great is because you can represent crowds super, super easily, or you can represent a group of people. I often, go to talks where people are like, oh, like there are multiple stakeholders. You have like your customers and your leadership team and your vendors and things like that. So if you want to represent like 3 distinct groups of people, a quick and easy way to do that is with a group of tooth people. This is the stroke order for tooth people that I use. I usually start with the head, again, because I struggle with like the spatial positioning thing. But if you start with the body and then go do the heads later, it actually means that you can like make the crowd as big as your paper allows, and then later on go ahead and do the head. So it doesn't really matter that much. Just do whatever is fun and easy for you. So this is the emotions matrix, kind of like a 3x3 device that Kate Rudder taught me. I think this is a really, really neat little device for practicing different emotion sets. So for this part, I'm going to go a little bit slower because if you do have pen and paper, I do encourage you to follow along for this part. So if you have pen and paper, I want you to start by just making a tic-tac-toe grid on your piece of paper. Do it with a little bit of room above and to the left of it because we're going to use that space. That's not just like throwaway space. So once you have that, I'd like you to put these weird little cryptic symbols, and I'm not going to explain what they're. You'll see what they are. So in the top row, above the tic-tac-toe grid, do a U, just like a lowercase u, and then a dash, and then an upside down U. And in the first column to the left of the entire grid, do 2 dashes that kind of go up and towards each other, and then 2 that are both flat on the same plane, but with a gap in between. And the final set is going to be, they're going to go in towards each other and down like a V shape, but with a gap between them. And then this part is fun. Well, okay, it's all fun, but this part is a little more open-ended. In every grid of the tic-tac-toe board, I want you to draw a face with just the eyes. So you can just do a circle with 2 eyes, which is probably the fastest way to do this. Or you can, like, I don't know, I draw a lot of cats and rabbits and dogs and things like that in my sketches. So you can also go for a little cat head if you want and put whiskers on it. I'm going to count to 20 in my head to give you time to do this. Okay, so it's okay if you're not done. I'll still talk through the exercise, and there will be free time at the end of each section for you to go back and practice. I'll try to make sure that each practice period is at least 5 minutes. So for the next part, what we're going to do is, you might have guessed this already, but the symbols at the top are the shape of mouths, and the symbols in the left-hand column, the first column, are the eyebrows. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull across the eyebrows going up and in to every face in the first row. Same for the second row and the third row. And then we're going to pull down the U for the mouth. So we're going to apply that U to everybody in the first column, and likewise for the next 2 columns. And I definitely encourage you to repeat this exercise and try different things. Like, see if you can do an open mouth, or maybe like a, I don't know, like a toothy grimacing mouth or something like that, and just see what happens when you combine different shapes of eyebrows and mouths. I think Kate called this like an emotions matrix or emotions 3x3 or something. And I really love this device because it shows that even like just by changing a couple of tiny, tiny strokes, you unlock 9 different emotions. And with each one of these squares, I think you can read, like, depending on context, you can build context by writing dialogue or by drawing other characters interacting with this person, or giving the person some internal thought bubbles that you write in, or something like that. You kind of open up a whole world of possibility already. Like I kind of, if you like show this grid to different people, they also might read different emotions. Like this first grid on the top row, leftmost column, I kind of see that as like someone's like, oh yeah, like this is fine. I'm perfectly okay with what you asked me, and deep down they're aggressively not okay with a request or with like the state of the world. This is like, I don't know, it's like Geekbot asking me on Monday morning after Christmas, like, how are you feeling today? I might like respond with that kind of emotion, be like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's not fine. The world is still on fire. Anyway, so other things I quickly wanted to show you before we go into free practice time. A couple of ways to upskill. So this is all kind of like building on each other, by the way. So, but it's like, I guess the common thing with all the people representations I've showed you is everyone has a round head. Everyone has a ball for a head, which makes this slide kind of applicable to any kind of person. So one thing that I think people struggle with is showing interaction with other people. I think like I remember in elementary school just drawing two people next to each other and being like, this is me and my family. But when you're trying to communicate, like a conversation, you're trying to show people interacting with each other, there are better ways than like just putting people next to each other. You can actually play with the tilt of the head to show people clearly in conversation. And like this I think is a really easy win. So the way that you do that is imagine that you have a watermelon and you slice the watermelon into a couple of vertical slices. The cuts on the watermelon would look like this, right? They would be most round. They would be rounder as they approach the edges, and the slice that's like directly in front of you would be a straight line. So that's the axis of the face. That's the horizontal. Yes, I think I always get this confused, but the horizontal axis of the face. The way that you show people looking around a room or looking left to right is you take the entire group of elements, that's the eyes, eyebrows, nose, mouth, if you have a nose, and you just shift that entire cluster to the left or to the right. Imagine the entire like horizontal axis has been curved a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. It's not actually, I don't know, I feel like I actually complicated it a little bit by talking about the axis, but essentially by moving the entire cluster face a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, you achieve what we call 3/4 view. 3/4 view is probably my favorite perspective to draw when I'm trying to do real art, because it gives you still the full face, but it also communicates directionality or emotion in a way that I think like a straight on or like a side profile can't communicate. You also still get both sides of the face. So when you do side profile, which I'll show in a bit, when you do side profile, you lose half the face, which means that you can't do asymmetrical expressions. Which, I don't know, like one of my favorite asymmetrical expressions is the emoji that has like one eyebrow down and one eyebrow raised. And I feel like that's an emotion that I feel a lot of the time. But another thing you can do once you start thinking about axes is you can, so imagine still like sliding around that whole cluster of the facial elements. You can move the whole cluster up or the whole cluster down. That communicates looking up or looking down. If you look around at webcomics, kind of going back to Cyanide and Happiness, I would say XKCD, but they don't have faces. So Cyanide and Happiness does this as well. And tons of webcomics that use simple representations for humans will like just sort of slide around the entire face around the head. So when you're drawing two or more people in conversation, I do recommend like 3/4 profile over side profile for the reasons I talked about before. I also just don't really like side profile. I feel like noses get really hard, and if you drew a character with ears ever, you have to like, or with hair, you have to like constantly be thinking about how to rotate the hair. 3/4 versus straight on is like a shorter leap than straight on to side profile. So it's just simpler, I think, to do 3/4. So the final thing I'll quickly talk about, I think I have time. Sometimes people ask me like, how do I make my drawings cuter? And I thought about this for a while. I was like, is this really relevant to what we're doing? And I was like, maybe it is, because maybe this is the thing that allows you to make your drawings more whimsical and like create the kind of characters that you want to create to tell friendly and, I don't know, like whimsical stories. So there's a couple of guidelines for capturing cuteness. This is just stuff that I've picked up over the years. I don't know if there probably is a book written by Disney animators about how to do this, or people who draw cartoons. But broadly, Humans think things are cute when their head to body ratio is closer to 1-to-1. That's why we find babies cute. That's why we find like kittens and puppies cute, because their heads and bodies are almost the same size when they're first born. So the closer that you can get to that ratio when you're doing cartoon representations of humans and animals, the cuter that most people's brains, like our sort of reptilian brains, kick in and be like, oh, that's a baby thing. Some other things you can think about are feature spacing. Baby animals also tend to have their features clustered in one part of their face. Not like there is such thing as too extreme, and it looks super weird if you go too extreme, but look on Google Images for kittens, like kittens and puppies. Like they have big eyes and sometimes like big noses, but their features are clustered in the centers of their faces. You can also play with the spacing of the eyes. I know I just said like the features are clustered, so this is more about cartooning style. Sometimes like people find it cuter when the eyes are really spaced far apart and there's a tiny little mouth. That's like kind of the kawaii, kind of like Japanese anime style. This is how Hello Kitty looks. Well, Hello Kitty has no mouth, so I guess her mouth is like infinitely small, but her eyes are super, super far apart. So it's kind of like that aesthetic. And the final thing to point out is like baby things also tend to have really large foreheads relative to their rest of the face. So typically I would put I put the eyes at around the midline of the head. The eyes are at the equator on an adult human head. For baby animals, I might move the eyes a little bit further down. But this can also get confusing if you're drawing a lot of things that are looking down and they're babies. So I would say because earlier we talked about how shifting the feature set to the bottom of the face makes them look like they're looking down. So to that, I would respond it depends on context. If you want to draw someone looking down, have them looking down at something, or have them looking down for a reason, like they're sad or disappointed, and build that context with dialogue. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to stop talking. I considered playing background music, but I think my team stream will just melt if I try to do that, so I'm not going to. So I'm going to set a timer to give you 5 minutes to experiment with this. If you want to see the full slides, slides from a longer version of this workshop are uploaded at deniseu.io/sketch, along with the images from this section. Okay, I'm going to mute myself so I'm not breathing into the mic. Awesome. I was talking for a little while and the Teams told me that I was muted. So hopefully that 7 minutes passed by pretty quickly. What I was kind of prattling on about was, I forgot to say earlier where this hashtag can be used for the sticker giveaway. So you can use hashtag VisualizeIT on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. I mostly look at Twitter, but Eamon and Nitya and other folks on the Microsoft team are going to be looking at Facebook and Instagram as well. So do feel free to share using whatever platform you're comfortable. There unfortunately is not a way to share within just the participants for this workshop. So sorry about that. Maybe we can put in a feature request to the team's developers for next time. Cool. So we're going to move on so that we can hit our break on the hour. So this next section I really like because I feel like it's kind of an underappreciated part of, I don't know, like building visual narrative and sketchnoting. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes on lettering and banners. So the reason why is because if you've ever just created a Microsoft Word document or just visited any website, you one of the first things that jumps out at you is that the words are in different, there's bigger words and smaller words, there's different fonts, different typography. Pretty much every way that we consume information, the information is presented using a visual hierarchy. Usually headers are, bigger, bolder, usually content text is smaller, some kind of easy to read serif or sans serif font, whatever. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that I think it pays to invest a little bit of time in learning how to write a couple of different fonts or typefaces using variations on your existing handwriting so that you can fake a visual hierarchy of information. That makes the stories that you're telling a lot easier to follow. And I'll show, I've added something to this deck actually that isn't in the other decks. I'll show the difference between a document that has no lettering differentiation really versus one that does. And you can see the impact of the impact on visual organization on that. So a couple of easy things you can do. Just write something normally and then try stretching it to make it taller, and then try squashing it to make it flatter. Maybe you can mix up case, or if you remember how to write cursive from school, you can try writing things in cursive. Mix that up with just writing things in printed letters. For this section, I guess to follow along, I'll just go sort of slowly through the slides so you can practice along. There will be some recorded GIFs as well in this section, but I'm going to give you a lot of time at the end to play with different banners and different letters and just get comfortable with the idea of creating visual hierarchy. So as I mentioned before, you can play with the dimensions of your normal handwriting. I think this is actually the easiest and sort of cheapest way to achieve visual differentiation. Something you can also do is you can play with giving serifs to your normal handwriting. So I think most people, this is kind of weird to say, but most people write sans serif by default because we don't put the caps on our letters unless you're really, really into calligraphy or typography or anything like that. But most of us write sans serif by default. So you can play with that a little bit to give serifs to your, the words, the way that you're normally writing words. Basically just find everywhere that a letter ends and give it a cap. That's a small dash that meets the end of the letter at a 90-degree angle. There's another variation on that, which I don't know, I kind of play around with this because I sometimes don't like the hard stops on some of the letters. You probably notice on the F and the R, I just kind of leave it off when a letter ends in a curl. So a while back, I was like, what if instead of just ending in a curl, I ended it in a weird little raindrop shape, which I think is kind of fun. You can also play with block letters. I think many people have doodled block letters in the margins of their notebooks in school at some point or another. But that's a really great way to attract attention. You notice the blocky text before you notice the non-blocky text. So this is great for short headers, short section headers. If someone's giving a talk and they're like, I have 4 pieces of advice about engineering management, you can do the letters in blocks, and that really clearly segments the document into 4 different sections. I'm going to play a video going through the line order of this later. Oh, and also this little font, Broadway, this is an actual font that used to be on computers in the 90s and 2000s. I don't know, it was on like the computer that my family had, and I was just like, we all had like a show tunes phase, right? Like, I don't know, I had a show tunes phase. I was just like obsessed with Broadway musicals for a while, and this is the font that they used for playbills. And so I just like learned to draw and write headers in this font in the margins of my notebooks for years and years. Very silly. So here's a demonstration of how you could do some of those fonts. So I'm going to use the word Beyonce as my base. So this is, I'm going to play this twice, by the way. This is just capping the ends with serifs. You don't really need to do the dashes. I think it would look a little bit too busy if you put serifs on like the accents. So I usually just skip that and just pretend like the accent doesn't exist. So something you can do is, this is like the font that I always see in flower shops, or like it's my attempt to do that font. So I just wrote the word in cursive and then went back and found the major downstrokes that I made and just made them thicker. Another time I did this workshop and someone referred to this font as the Wine Mom font, and I think that's just the greatest name for it that I've ever come across. So it's permanently etched in my mind as Wine Mom. So this is the Broadway font. One thing that maybe I should call out is the way that I learned to do this was I just like drew words from an existing font face, which is a great way to learn to put more fonts and more headers and more things like that into your visual library. So there's a font on the computer that you like, go on Google Fonts, go on, I don't know, just open up Microsoft Word, whatever, type out a couple of words, make it like size 96, and just see if you can replicate it on a piece of paper. I think it's a good exercise to do. It also really gives you appreciation for typography designers. Man, their jobs are hard. So this is one way of blocking out letters. You can just write letters in your normal handwriting as a first go in a lighter color. You could do this in pencil. And I know earlier I said like never erase, but this is the one case where you can erase because it's throwaway. Like it's not part of the thing, it's guiding work. Actually, I think I'm just gonna roll forward. If you want me to play this again, just drop a question in the Q&A and we can go back and play it. So other fonts that you can do are you can look around the world and see what fonts exist in like the space that you're in. One font that I enjoy doing is the calculator font, which obviously occurs in calculators, but it also occurs in digital alarm clocks, oven timers, microwave timers, all kinds of things. So you can practice using that. I use this sometimes when I'm talking about like, oh, like robotic, I don't know, concept, like something very technical. I just associate this with computers, and I shouldn't because I've worked as an engineer for like 6 years and I should know more, but I still think like computers look like this. Something else you can do is you can mix up, we talked about axes earlier when we were talking about like spinning faces around the circle. So you can also mix up the x-axis of your writing. You can use pencil for this. You can just draw a squiggle and try to, I usually turn the paper when I do this because it's too hard for me to turn my wrist. But turn the paper around as you follow the squiggle and it can lead to a really fun effect. So the second half that I want to talk about here is banners. So once you get the hang of different typefaces, different typography, one thing that you can do in combination or instead of varying up your handwriting is to encase the things that you write inside of banners. I say like either or because I find that usually by drawing a banner that's enough of a visual grab that you usually don't also need to have a different handwriting, but it's a different effect. It gives the document a different feel if you do choose to combine them. So definitely play around with this, see what works for you, see what you find fun, and see what you find to be, I don't know, communicating the tone of the story that you want to tell. So banners are super important. Oh no, sorry, they're super useful for framing important information. Usually, once upon a time, I used to try really hard to think of banner ideas that complemented the subject matter that I was telling. Like if I was listening to a talk about, I don't know, someone from Boeing, for example, was giving a talk about their IT projects. I think like, oh, okay, clouds, airplanes, all these things are related to like aviation. But then like it just is too much to think about when you're in the moment just trying to capture. So now I'm just like, oh, whatever. I'm just going to have a couple of banners that I go to, not worry too much about that. Like, it's kind of cute if you can think of everything, you know, thematic, but it also is a lot of, I don't know, it's a lot of cycles when you're already trying to keep up with things. And I'm all about trying to reduce those cycles now. So we're going to do one together. This is probably the one that I get most commonly asked about. We're going to do this one interactively. So grab your pen and paper and write a short phrase anywhere on the paper. And also the pro tip here is always write the thing before you draw the banner, because it is heartbreaking to draw this beautiful banner and then start putting text in it and realize that the text doesn't fit. And you've been doing this in pen, obviously, so you can't go back and correct it. So write the thing first and then do the banner. So I'm going to use the phrase learn to code. What we're going to do first is draw a rectangle around that, around the whole thing. Try to give it like equal buffer, equal margin, padding, equal padding on all sides. So it looks nice, but it's not totally important. Okay, so once you got your rectangle, this is going to be like that kind of tattoo-ish banner. You'll see what I mean in a second. We're going to give our learn to code rectangle some shark fins. So top left, just draw a triangle coming out and do the reverse, inverse. You can turn your paper upside down if it helps for this. I can't do spatial terms today, but there's a shark fin on the top and a shark fin on the bottom. Try to make them about the same size, but it's fine if they're not. It doesn't matter. Now what we're going to do is we have the front of the banner now, and we've started drawing the back. So the sharks are actually one layer back. We're going to draw the next layer back, which is the same side as we see. So we're going to pull out some horizontal lines. From the top of the shark fin, draw a line that goes out to the left. And draw a line that is about the same height difference from the bottom of the original rectangle as the height of the shark fin. So where this little green squiggle is, those green squiggles should be about the same. And if they're not, it doesn't matter. It can be imperfect. Imperfect is key for this. Just ship it, get it out, get it done. Do the same thing for the other side. And the final thing we're going to do, which is going to make it look, it's going to make it feel like that type of banner, is we're going to give it a tail. We're going to give it like ribbon snips. I think the easiest way to do this is to draw in. You can start by drawing a straight line and then turning it into a V. I usually just go for the V. It doesn't really matter whether the sides of the V are exactly the same height. You can draw a straight edge if you want. You can draw little tiny V's if you want, so it looks like a rough cut or like someone cut it with little craft scissors. But this is pretty much it. This is the, I know this is a lot of steps. It might have felt hard doing this the first time. I get that. If you do this a couple more times, just practice it like 3 or 4 more times, I guarantee it'll get a lot easier really, really fast. So variations on this, instead of having corners, instead of having sharp edges for the folds, imagine this is blowing in the wind, right? So it would be curved. You could try doing this with curved lines rather than sharp lines. Lots and lots of different ways to iterate on this. So I want to close off the me talking portion of this by just showing you an example of, so this is a sketch note that I did back in 2019. What? That was so long ago. 2 years ago, I was at a one-day conference where I was listening to people talking about chaos engineering. This actually isn't, this is not my process. So like, I acknowledge that this is a little bit of a misrepresentation. This is not like the before and after. This is, I went back and retroactively stripped out some of the things that I had done. But this is what this document looks like without any kind of text variation. There's still a little bit, right? Like I still wrote his name in all caps, but it's mostly my handwriting. No color, no arrows, no banners, nothing. And this is what it looks like with colors and with banners and with visual guides. So in my opinion, this looks a lot more organized than this. When I'm looking at the black and white version, I'm like, where am I supposed to go next? Like what piece of information relates to what else? So what's the claim? What's the supporting evidence? In what order did Aaron even say these things? So by giving it some arrows, by giving it clear anchors for the eyes, you can now see like, okay, here's like kind of the intro part. Here's kind of supporting, a side note that he made about the Woods theorem. the thrust of his talk was about how we spend too much time reacting and not enough designing for security. So this is like the reacting versus designing, and also the sort of subjectivity of security incidents is kind of what my eye gets drawn to. So I'm going to give you from now until 2 o'clock. So we're going to sort of go into practice/break. I'm going to start back probably a few minutes after 2, so don't worry about rushing back. But do like play around with this a little bit, figure out what it means to vary your normal handwriting, figure out what it means to start putting things in banners, and sort of try to compare and contrast that with a world without visual markers and without visual hierarchy. With that, I'm going to mute myself, and I will see you all back at 2 p.m. about 6 or 7 minutes. All right, we're going to slowly ramp back up. Thanks to everyone who's been tweeting using the hashtag. Also, hi, Taylor. I didn't realize my friend Taylor was on this call. It's been really cool seeing everyone's first time doodling. It's always a lot of fun. So I'm going to go kind of slowly to give people a chance to roll back to their computers. Oh, I had a break slide and I forgot to put it up. Good job, me. This is a picture I drew of cats programming together. If you've heard of the term mob programming before, my friend Marit and I have kind of been on a, I don't know, not really a campaign, like a lazy campaign, like the Oasis song, like starting a revolution from your bed. That's what I'm kind of on, like just the laziest campaign in the world to reterm mob programming as ensemble programming. In part because mob is a word that, especially after the events of this week, can evoke, I don't know, images of people just being angry and rioting and destroying things, and that might not be the visual that you want to associate with programming and being collaborative with each other while building something cool. So anyway, these kittens are ensemble programming. I do have a sticker of this, but that's not in the Twitter giveaway because I didn't print it myself. It's on Redbubble somewhere. I'll put links to that later. Cool. Okay, I think I've rambled about nothing for long enough, so let's resume. So the first half of this workshop was kind of about general purpose skills. That was kind of my way of, in part, like building a little bit of confidence for people who don't draw every day, who don't identify strongly as being artists. I wanted to go over emotions and people and characters and banners and letters to give you some basic tools to tell any story. Hopefully you feel more able now than you did an hour ago. So the second half of this workshop is going to be a little bit more specific. The anthropomorphism is less, but certainly the last section of this will be pretty specific to tech. So I'm going to just prime you a little bit. Do start thinking a little bit about technical concepts that you might want to communicate to another person, maybe things that you've learned recently in your job, in your, I don't know, in life, about self-care, about, I don't know, anything really. Think about like a little story or like a concept that you're interested in communicating using this skill set. We're going to first talk about anthropomorphism, and that's going to link to the second portion. So this is a huge word that I have trouble pronouncing, so I don't know why I put it in every deck. It's torture myself every time I run this workshop. But anthropomorphism is the attribution of human characteristics or behavior to a god or an animal or an object. So we're not going to be worrying too much about gods. This is not about like visualizing Greek plays or anything like that. But mostly we're going to be dealing with objects because a lot of the things that we deal with as technology professionals are objects or concepts. Perhaps actual objects, like if you write Java or Ruby, but I mean more like concrete things like servers, requests, packets, I don't know, load balancer, like whatever like happens to be in your domain right now. So one of the most fun things, and the reason why we spent so long on characters in the beginning of this is because of this section. To me, one of the most like fun and distinctive and rewarding things about using art to talk about technical concepts is if you anthropomorphize all the things, it makes it possible for people to connect with the story and kind of hook into the story in a way that's not possible with just documentation. I think that people, you know how like, you ever see the back of a chair or like the back of a car or something, and you're like, oh, it looks like eyes and a face. I think like humans are just kind of hardwired to look for faces everywhere, and then we start empathizing with like the lights on the back of a car or like cabinets with like knobs that look like a face or something like that. But I think this is just something like deep down in our brains. Like we want to empathize with the things that we're looking at. We search for characters where there are none sometimes. But I think like when you do give human-like expressions and human-like characteristics to the characters or the things in your story, it makes people more likely to remember them. It makes people more open to hearing about like, oh, I want to know what happened to the rest of this Cloud Foundry service instance. Like I want to know more about what happened to that Docker container. So I want to get you in the mode of like trying to introduce characters using, and those characters are non-traditional things, like non-traditional characters. So let's go through a quick example. I have a lot of examples in this section, but I am going to give you a lot of time on this because this section just generates like the most awesome tweets. So Docker containers are so just like the sort of high level on what Docker is. Docker is a virtualization software very commonly used by application teams to deploy their applications. Docker containers are the abstraction that we use to explain, like, this is the application plus its environment. And it's very, very commonly represented in software architecture diagrams as a square. And usually when people say like container, they'll draw a square and they'll write the word container underneath it as if there's any room for doubt about what this is. And that's all fine. Like if you say, okay, this, and you write the word Docker near it, I will know that you mean a Docker container. This is perfectly fine. But I think we can take it to the next level. What if we give that Docker container a little depth? What if it's not just like a flat square? Now it's like very clearly an object. It's very clearly a cube, maybe a box. It's something that can contain something else, which makes a lot of sense. If you've used Docker, you know that Docker containers contain like a base image, some volumes, the application code, a bunch of other, like all your dependencies, that kind of thing. So this already, like by drawing it as a box, it actually gets a little bit closer to the abstraction that I think Docker, wants us to have mentally. But what if we go a little bit further and we actually give that Docker container like the worst personality ever, like the most boring personality, but arms, legs, and a face? What this enables you to do, okay, first of all, it's way more awesome if your Docker containers have faces and limbs. But second of all, like what this actually opens up is you can communicate more about the state of a container now. So if you have used Docker, you'll be familiar with the idea that Docker containers can go through different lifecycle states. They can be starting up, they can be suspended, they can be running, they can be, what else? You can kill a Docker container, they can be dead, which is a little bit morbid, but you can represent all of those states, those like boring, dumb software lifecycle states that nobody cares about. You can represent those states as emotions now and as characteristics, states of being for this object, for this little character that you can relate to. I just called Docker lifecycle states stupid and boring. Sorry if anyone works on Docker. The lifecycle states are great and wonderful, and we love them. So let's do a couple of examples together. I've gone and anthropomorphized just a couple of household objects. I'm doing like kind of non-technical stuff in this space because I know that every time, like, there are always non-technical people on this workshop, so kind of want to diversify the subject matter. But let's say that you want to do a coffee mug, and you can anthropomorphize literally any object. The only thing you can't anthropomorphize is a human, because humans already have human characteristics, so that's redundant. But literally anything else. So when I think of a coffee mug, I associate that with being really tired because it is the object that I reach for first thing in the morning when my brain doesn't work yet. So when I was doing this, I was thinking, oh, like my coffee mug is also probably tired and asleep and probably doesn't want to go to work as much as I do. So that's one way you can do a coffee mug. I think in terms of like where to put the face on an object, just go for the biggest surface area. I would just do like the main part of the mug. If you do a spoon or fork, just do like the place where you have the most space to draw features. Something fun that you can do if you choose an object that has like discrete components or members is you can give different personalities to each of the components. So in tech, I can see a scenario where you're trying to talk about a database with different partitions, or maybe, I don't know, just like 3 instances of the same application running, and you're trying to tell a story about some tool that you made that can automatically restart one of those instances if something bad happens. So that's something that you can totally achieve by giving different personalities to each of the elements, right? Like this is an ice cream sundae that has 3 scoops of ice cream, but imagine this is 3 servers being managed by a load balancer. What if one of those servers is unhealthy? Like, what would that look like? What would that look like given the set of emotions that we've already looked through? Maybe there's already a face in the emotions matrix that you have on your piece of paper that you can just cross-apply to one of the elements in the drawing. So I'm going to give you a lot of time on this because I really, really love seeing what comes out of this. But I encourage you to look back to the character work that we did earlier. Consider even incorporating some of the stuff we did around writing, like typography, fonts. see if you can use some of that to build context. Sometimes like some emotions are not self-evident, and that's okay. You never have to, you don't have, like, you never need to draw something that speaks for itself. We're aiming for the fidelity of like web comics here, or like, you know, like Cyanide and Happiness, or like XKCD, like that kind of thing. And they always have text. Like you always need text to tell the full story, and that's completely okay here. I would maybe avoid like trying to label things. Like if you draw an ice cream sundae that's upset, maybe don't write like sad ice cream under, but use the text to be like a speech bubble or dialogue or something, and tell the reader about why the ice cream sundae is upset. Or maybe if it's upset because it's melting, like draw the sun in the corner or something like that. Like try to use dialogue to kind of build context that explains like why the character is feeling the way that they do, rather than just telling me like what they're feeling. I think that's kind of like, I don't know, kind of like next level with this. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to anthropomorphize some objects. Please do keep the posts coming with the hashtag. They look amazing so far. Yeah, I will unmute myself again in about 10 minutes. Right, I know it hasn't been a full 10 minutes, so I'm going to start talking you back because I realized I wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. There have been some questions kind of trickling in on chat. Also, a good call out by Eamon. If you don't have Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you can also totally use the hashtag on LinkedIn, which I have not really checked very recently, but one of the people on the team will be looking at LinkedIn. Cool, so I'll sort of like slowly, I do hope that you share some of your work from this anthropomorphizing section, this part. This is probably, well, this and the next section are probably the like most open-ended creative sections of this workshop, and I hope you've had fun with it. So the final section of content, I'm going to aim to spend about 25, maybe 30 minutes on this, and then we'll pause for time for questions at the end. If you want to drop off before questions, that's also fine too. We're going to end a little bit before 3 because we're very online and we don't really need to be online more than we absolutely have to these days. So the final section of this, and I think is the most challenging, but also the most fun section. This is the section that kind of stitches together a lot of the workshop. And hopefully this is like the aha moment for, oh, like this is how I can use this in my work. Like I'm going to use this device the next time I write a blog post or write a conference talk or something. Like who's writing conference talks these days? But you know what I mean, like in the future days. So we're going to end by talking about metaphors. Specifically, these are going to be low fidelity metaphors. And I'll talk about what that means. So by low fidelity, I mean that we're not trying to richly capture information in the way that documentation would. We're going to use low fidelity metaphors, which means to choose one aspect of a concept and highlight just that one dimension of the concept by using an easily understandable and illustratable, that's important, an easily understandable and illustratable metaphor. And I want to keep returning to this idea of this being low fidelity because the goal of drawing art like this, the goal of producing doodles and comics is not to be a substitute for technical documentation. That's never the goal. This is never going to replace technical documentation. Like that requires a level of detail and accuracy and precise communication in a way that we just can't achieve with doodles. Doodles are more about adding fun, like adding color and adding visual intrigue, visual engagement to content that otherwise would be difficult to communicate or difficult to engage someone with. So this is an entry point for learning, or like a starting point, like an invitation to a conversation is how I like to think about it. So that's sort of like what we're aiming for. Don't worry about communicating everything, and I'll go through the step-by-step process that at least I use for figuring out exactly what to capture and how to capture it. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories, very meta, because this is a workshop about storytelling. But so I do a lot of art related to tech, and once in a while I'll challenge myself to talk about I don't know, something that exists in the real world, like the 12 factors of Heroku apps, or I don't know, like ACID databases or something. So one of the 12 factors, I think this is the fallacies of distributed systems, but something like that. In one of these drawings, I wanted to figure out a way to communicate unencrypted communication. I think the concept that I was trying to get after was there's a recommendation that you should always use encrypted transport in flight and at rest, storage and transport and storage of information. So that basically means like opting for HTTPS rather than HTTP. Don't make sure that you're using keys and certs and things like that on both ends. Make sure that only your recipient can decrypt the message, essentially. Don't transmit like an unencrypted message in flight. Imagine you're a bank and you transmit like someone's account details in flight, then really bad things would happen. So even just like talking through this concept, I'm already hinting that this is bad, right? Like obviously unencrypted communication is undesirable. Security people will tell you like this is something that we need to secure ASAP. We cannot have this in production systems. So it's dangerous. So I sort of asked myself, like, what are some ways that we can illustrate this? I ended up going for this metaphor of cats. I just like always do cats because I don't like to draw people, but two cats that are sending messages via envelopes to each other using carrier pigeons, using birds in this case. And in the middle, there's a bad actor who's another cat who's got a net. And using that net, the bad actor can capture one of these birds and swap out the bird's envelopes with a different envelope. That doesn't necessarily have to happen when you're, doing like a man-in-the-middle attack. But the point of it is like you can have a third party who's not your recipient listen in, or open up the envelope containing the message that you want to get all into the recipient. So I think I don't know, this is generally pretty understandable. I feel like most people who have worked in web development or technology at least have encountered the concepts of encryption, have encountered at rest for, secure message sending and that sort of thing. So let's try something a little bit harder. I used to work at a company called Pivotal where we had a big enterprise, enterprise installation of our platform was like our core business actually. And we had a group of people called solutions architects that go on site and install our software on other companies' computers and help them get started. So I was working with someone who was a lead of the solutions architects org, and he wanted me to do a sketch note for a conference talk that I think he was doing at the time. And the core thing he wanted to communicate was he wanted to talk about what his team does. So they do what's broadly considered digital transformation, which is a very nebulous concept. And their job is to go to conferences and break down what that means to people who have not worked in digital transformation before. And so he really wanted to talk about how one of the things that his team does is re-platforming legacy applications. I was like, whoa, that's a tall order. That's something that even if you do work in enterprise software, there's a lot of finicky details around that. It's very subtly different depending on what you're migrating from and what you're migrating to. So what we did is I got this person on a call. We got on Zoom and we sat down for half an hour and just talked through what it is that he wanted to communicate about this. So my process for going from this thing that I want to talk about to this way that I'm going to visualize it is 3 stages. I start with a technical idea. I have to make sure I understand it. That's kind of key to this. You totally can use sketchnoting as a forcing function to force yourself to go deeper and get to that technical understanding point where you can then explain it to another person. They say, teaching something to another person is the best way to learn it. And I think that is totally what's happening here. But basically, make sure you have a solid understanding of the technical idea. And then talk through what are some emotions and senses. How do you feel about this? Which kind of sounds like airy-fairy. I don't know. It sounds fluffy, right? But I think that actually is the hook. Because you're going to be always supplementing this with text or with dialogue or with a person talking over a slide at a conference, you don't need to worry about capturing everything. But you do want to use the visual in a way that's meaningful. And the way that it's meaningful is to get the viewer to empathize with what it is that you did. What's the value of replatforming a legacy application? Why does this team exist? Why does this company exist? Why does this project exist? That's kind of some of the intrigue that I'm trying to create around this. So once I figure out what emotions, what senses am I trying to communicate, I settle on a low fidelity representation. So I choose physical objects that I can use to stand in for some of those concepts that I think a regular person without context about this domain could relate to. So that was a lot of words. I'm just going to show you. So Rohit and I sat down and we talked through, what his team goes through when you actually perform a legacy application replatforming. And he told me that we're experts, and the reason why we get called in for our expertise is because this is a risky process. These are often multi-million-dollar applications. If they go down for any extended period, the business loses a lot of money, and Pivotal loses the customer's trust forever if this happens. So it's cumbersome, it's difficult, it's unpredictable. These applications are temperamental. They're often 10, 20, 30 years old. They're really, really old. So it's dangerous. It involves a lot of teamwork. It involves a lot of cooperation with the clients. And yeah, it involves a lot of you often feel like you're performing surgery sometimes. So I was like, okay, this is a lot to work with. This is great. So I wanted to highlight the sort of cooperation aspect because I thought there's a lot of negativity here. Let's pull one piece of positivity out of that. And I think that'd be good anyway, because it shows Pivotal likes to work with its customers. We stand shoulder to shoulder rather than dictating what to do. We're cooperating. I want to emphasize old, but I think I can do that in a cute way. And I'm going to talk about how things are fragile, or this has to be like a precision move. So I settled on this metaphor, like two cats working in conjunction to move a dinosaur from who knows where else, doesn't really matter where it came from, onto a cloud, because our whole thing was cloud migration. And that's, you know, that was like, this is the most literal representation of the cloud. And if you work in cloud computing, good news, you always have this representation of a cloud. That's super easy. You can always use this. If you don't, well, everyone still uses the cloud anyway, so you can still use this. So this idea of like lifting and shifting to the cloud, this is what we ended up with. And they, I don't know, Rohit really liked it. Other people thought this was really cute. So it's stuff like this. Like this also notice how there's no application here. There's no mention of Pivotal or Cloud Foundry or, I don't know, like servers or anything. It's literally just like two cats moving a dinosaur. And that is kind of the level that we're trying to go for. I don't literally want to show the process of like moving an application binary from here to there, or like, you know, all the config files and things like that. That's something that like those details are what Rohit would talk about when he's at the conference. So I don't need to do that again in the drawing. So we're going to do this together. I want you to, so hopefully your brain is a little bit primed from earlier, but I would like you to think about one concept. So we'll go through this together slowly, and then I'll give you free time again, and you can go through the cycle a few more times. Think of a concept that you learned a few years into your career. I want you to pick a concept that is kind of difficult, something that wasn't like obvious from day one of being a software engineer or a product manager or something like that. Something that like took you a little while to understand, and maybe it's a little bit abstract, but you think you can explain this to another person now. I'll pause there for 10 seconds. If you want, you can write it down. Okay, so hopefully you have a concept. I think I have some cheat concepts later on if you don't have anything. Oh, I really should have like the file view. I always forget what slide is coming up next. So here's some ideas in case you blanked for those 10 seconds and you can't think of anything. This is also like heavily biased by what my career has been. So if you haven't done like weird platform development for 3 years, not everything here might be applicable. But yeah, just try to do something along, these lines are along, whatever, you get the point. Let's move on. Hopefully you have an idea. So for the next part of this exercise, basically you're going to be doing what Rohit and I did together with building that word cloud. It doesn't have to be a cloud, you can just write a list of words. But I want you to come up with 10 to 20, and this is a large number, I know. I'm going to give you a full minute for this. Feelings and senses that come to mind when you think about this concept. So think about you learning this concept. Think about you practicing this thing. Do you do it every day? Like, what's that like? I'm going to pause for a full minute. Okay, hopefully you have a list of at least a few words that you're happy with. Don't worry if you don't have a full 10 to 20. I just like to set out ambitious goals so that we put more things down on paper. So the next step, so this is the hard part. I'll break down this question a little bit in a moment. The next question to think about is like, how can you represent some of these feelings? So you're probably, if you actually wrote down 20 words, you're probably not going to be able to do all 20. So like pick 2 or 3 of them. How can you represent some of these feelings without needing deep subject matter expertise. So let me break down this question to a few more steps. Another way to think about this is, what real world physical things can stand in as representations for some of those emotions and experiences? So I gave you the dinosaur example earlier, but let's go through a couple more examples together. So if you pick the concept and your recall of that today is, it was just a huge amount of information to learn. I feel like I spent forever learning it. It was like vast, right? So it's that feeling of like immenseness, or like largeness, like something that was huge, right? So what I would do with that is I would start thinking, okay, shift gears a little bit. What else is a physically large item, or maybe animal, like that you can represent yourself like conquering or befriending? And I don't know, I think if I was doing this, I've been watching a lot of Avatar: The Last Airbender, so I would try to draw Appa, the flying yak, and be like, oh, it's like learning how load balancers work. It's like learning to be friends with Appa or something. But think of just like physically large things, like a skyscraper or a pyramid, or maybe like a giant whale. If you can't draw whales, what if you drew a giant fish? Draw a stick figure for scale. That's always a great trick. Everyone can kind of like, say that stick figure means like average size human. Everything else is in relation to that. So what is a huge, like physically large thing that you can draw without, going down a perfectionist rabbit hole, without like worrying too much about it? And then just try to start with that. Like, see what you can do with that. If you want to put a human in the picture, what does it mean for that human to be conquering the thing? Like, does that mean climbing the pyramid? Does that mean like swinging off the skyscraper like King Kong? Like, I don't know. It's completely up to you. And what expressions might that person have? Like, do any of the expressions we looked at earlier from the expressions matrix map well to this scenario? Another example, maybe when you recall this concept, you remember like every time you understood something, there was another new thing to learn. So maybe you remember the experience of like, just never really being on solid footing with this thing, which I can totally relate to. That basically, I feel like that's my life all the time in software engineering. So sometimes you can, and I know this might be difficult if English is not your first language, or being in a Western context. I know like idioms and sayings are very culture specific. So to some extent, so I guess like that is a caveat. If you do choose to rely on idioms, you might have to do a little more work on writing what's happening, because people without that cultural context are not going to be able to understand that. So one idiom here that comes to mind is like moving goalposts, which is something that is often said when you don't really know what you're supposed to be achieving, because every time you get close, the goalpost moves. So what would it look like if you physically, like visualize this, right? Like there's a goalpost that's a character, and there's a soccer ball that's a different character, and the goalpost is literally running away from the soccer ball. Or the character can be the soccer player. And a goalpost who's saying like nah, you can't catch me, or I don't know, something like that. Dialogue is totally your friend here. Dialogue, captioning, all of that is completely legit. Another way you could maybe think about this is, I don't know, like cats. It's like an example that came to mind for me because I have cats. Cats always are chasing laser pointers, but they never catch it, right? Because you can't catch light. So that might be another thing to look at. So again, like here's the process. Start with the technical idea. Think about, interrogate your own emotions and senses, and figure out which elements from that set you want to communicate to your viewer or to your audience, and settle on a low fidelity representation, just exploring those, like that very narrow slice of all of those emotions and senses. Look for physical objects, use context, use characters. I'm going to pause on this slide for about, I'm going to pause for 8 minutes because I have some wrap-up slides before the Q&A period. So we'll come back at 2:48. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to pop them into chat. All right. We're at around 2:48, which gives us about 2 minutes to wrap up. So hopefully that was fun and challenging. If you're comfortable with sharing what metaphors you came up with, I would love to see them, and I think Eamon would love to see them, and Nitya would love to see them as well, using our hashtag. So if you found that challenging, it was meant to be pretty challenging. I think this is the most kind of cycles consuming part of at least like how I do like tech doodling. So one way to get faster is to just do this more often. You can also like pre-think some of the metaphors that you could make if you're about to go into a conference, for example, and you've plotted out a couple of talks that you want to go to, and you know that this person's going to be talking about, I don't know, like the Go compiler, for example. Then you can start thinking ahead of like, what else is compilation like? Or what else are abstract syntax trees like? And you can kind of like load a couple of potential directions into your mind. If you're doing this in real time, one other cheat that I do all the time is I leave space on the paper to come up with a visual later. So I'll write something like load balancing is really hard, and then just kind of like leave that part of the paper blank. Come back to it after the talk is finished when I've thought of something. But there also is kind of a risk of like going down the perfectionism slippery slope if you do that too often. So I try to just think of something quick, commit it to paper, and just move on. So to kind of wrap this up, I'm going to give you some ideas for exercises that you could try on your own if you want to keep practicing some of the skills that we've gone over today. One way that I think this, I don't know, I feel like I've been pretty starved of human company for the last year or so, so this could be fun. If you have a buddy who, you know, like a peer or a coworker or someone on your team, like anyone really, who you enjoy just like talking to, like coffee chats or whatever, you can practice this exercise. You can basically interview that person, ask them to talk a little slower, and ask them, tell me about something interesting or technical that you've learned recently. Set a timer for a fixed length of time and make sure that timer is in a place where you can both see it. So if you're using Zoom or whatever, you know, maybe do a screen share of a browser, Chrome or a Google timer or something like that. And as they speak, just try to practice capturing some of what they say, using some of the doodling techniques we've learned today. If they want to do this as well, you can swap and make them doodle what you are talking about. I find that this is, I've done this a couple of times. I more commonly just do this when someone's doing a conference talk. The advantage to recording talks rather than someone just ad hocing like free, I guess, rambling, is that conference talks are already structured. Like the presenter has already thought about the flow of information. So this is actually a harder exercise than just watching a TED talk or watching a recorded conference talk, because oftentimes people will be like, oh yeah, I did this thing, and there was this other thing that I also did, and you kind of have to like go back and be like, oh, like now you just broke in my linear like composition. Is a different skill set. Another thing that you can do if you found it tricky to invent things today. So when you were looking around the room for things to anthropomorphize and you found yourself like, just like doing a lot of searching, that might be an indication that you could benefit from doing exercises to deliberately expand your visual library. Again, just a fancy way of saying practice drawing things once so that you know how to draw them again later. One way that I like to do it is just write a list of between 10 and 30 words. Really depends on how hard you want to push yourself. Write those words on a Google Doc, in notes, whatever. Put it on your computer. Put it somewhere that you can see every word pretty clearly. Set yourself a timer, 5 minutes on a piece of paper. Just try to draw as many of those words as possible. This will force you to go for fast and easy rather than precise and detailed. Don't worry about precise and detailed. If you're doing this to a live conference talk, you don't have time to put in, like every key on a keyboard, for example. You're looking for the fastest, dirtiest representation. So those are 2 exercises that you could try. We are at the end of content delivery for this workshop. I hope that you've had fun. I hope that this has been a relaxing, fun, kind of like lightly challenging thing to do on a Saturday afternoon. I'll stick around until 3 o'clock, so 7 more minutes or so, to answer any questions. I see a couple of questions in Q&A. But if you want to hang around and ask more, Eamon and I will be looking at that. But if you want to drop off, totally fine. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope that this was fun. I hope you've learned something. And I look forward to reviewing the hashtag in a couple of hours. All right, so there is a question in chat. What are some tools we can use to draw online instead of paper? I'm not 100% I'm interpreting this question correctly. For digital drawing, which is what I do, I use an iPad that has Procreate on it, and I have an Apple Pencil. And I just export things off my iPad as PNGs and post those online. If the question is about collaborative drawing on the internet, I know a lot less about that. I don't actually know any tools for doing that because I don't really do real-time collaborative drawing. If I am going to, I sometimes will like draw with like on a video call with friends, just like exist in the same headspace, but I actually don't really do collaborative work at all other than like interviewing someone for the subject matter. And then like in that sense, we like intellectually paired on it, but not like actually paired on the execution. I hope that answers your question. Before I bought my iPad, because I know that like getting an iPad is, an iPad Pro even more, is a lot of money. It's not chunk change. Before I had that, my workflow was actually just using pen and paper. I just had a couple of fine liners. I like Staedtler brand, Staedtler, I think it's a German or Dutch company. But I like their fine liners because they're more immune to my hand rubbing over them because I do that all the time. But I would scan those, that pen and paper drawing using the Google Scan app or the Dropbox like document capture app. And then I would clean up the digital artifacts and digitally color it in a open source photo editor called Krita, Krita. It's kind of a free open source alternative to Adobe Photoshop. And then I basically would just like publish from there. I had a Wacom, I also used a Wacom tablet, just like the entry level model, which is about $80 USD. So my whole kit really was just pen and paper and Wacom and my computer. So if you're interested in digital drawing, that might be it's kind of painful. Like I ultimately bought the iPad because I didn't want to do that anymore. But if you want to learn the basics of digital drawing, that might be a good way to go. Someone asked a question, how do you represent time? I think the quickest and easiest representation is a clock or an hourglass. If you can do an hourglass quickly. I usually just go for a clock and do a clock face with just like two hands pointing anywhere. Most of the time people can see that that's a clock. Yeah, someone also, oh yeah, great comment. Someone said, I use clocks to represent time, but you could also use images from nature and visual cues like changes of lighting. That's a great point. You can also do like a sun and a moon if you wanted to represent like the passage of a day, maybe. Okay. I am doing a terrible job of scrolling through the questions. Cool. Well, I don't see. Oh, yeah, cool. Thanks everyone for the comments. I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think I'll hand it over to Eamon to do the Microsoft side wrap up, and maybe, I don't know if there's any more events in this series, but anyway, I'll just hand it over to Eamon. Thanks everyone for sticking with me for the last 2 hours.
Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll have the recording up on our YouTube page, I think in a couple of days, and I'll ask Denise if she's able to share the slides at all and put the links up. Thank you so much for joining.